At the very beginning of World War II, one man's vision and ability to see the true capabilities of a stealth machine could very possibly have changed the war's outcome to the Nazi regime's favour. His aim was to blockade the merchant shipping routes and stifle the British of their much-needed war supplies, food and other essentials. His weapon of choice could possibly be considered the world's first true weapon of stealth. These weapons were so intimidating that Churchill once stated, "They were the only thing that really frightened me." Join us this week as we investigate another interesting aspect of sea power. This is a modern battle group, and it represents today's most advanced naval firepower. This British group consists of many different vessels acting in unison to create a single unit. However, it is the aircraft carriers that are the major component of this fleet. Its role is to combine air power to the fleet's sea power. In this case, the aircraft are the Harrier jump jet and various helicopters. The other prominent vessel of the fleet is the submarine, and a fleet of this size may have more than one. The submarine's role has changed much, but one aspect remains the same. The submarine is a weapon of stealth. This fleet's submarine contingent may be many miles ahead of the fleet and acting as the ears of the battle group. The submarine can be employed as a passive or aggressive member of the fleet. Today's modern submarine has a teardrop-shaped bow. This is a French Rubes-class submarine, which were built between 1986 and 1993. The teardrop hull design vastly improved the submerged speed of the submarine. Previous to this hydrodynamic improvement, submarines were not able to catch ships while submerged. Today, they have a greater submerged speed than surface speed and can easily keep up with the carrier battle group. Probably the most recognised class of teardrop-shaped submarines is the Ohio class, which was featured in the Hollywood blockbuster Hunt for Red October. This single vessel has more firepower than all the bombs used throughout the entire Second World War. These submarines are often referred to as boomers and were designed in the 1970s at a cost of over $2,000 million each. They were, until recently, the most expensive submarines to be built. They carry 24 ballistic missiles. Seen here is the Trident C4 version. The Ohio class and its counterparts are perhaps the most deadly weapon of war to be built. They can strike with little or no warning under a cloak of extreme stealth.
Prepare one.
This is a test of a C4 Trident launch. The missile is ejected in a column of compressed gas. Upon reaching the surface, the missile fires the first of its 3 stages of rockets. The C4 has a range of over 4,000 miles, and the main missile holds 8 individual missiles, which can be independently targeted. Each of the 8 missiles has a 100 kiloton warhead, which is approximately 5 times greater than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Submarines today have many roles. They can sit quietly and passively, gathering information. They can attack enemy ships, both merchant and naval, or they can be used as nuclear strike platforms. Although submarines were used in World War I, their true potential wasn't realised until World War II. Admiral Donitz was in charge of the German U-boat campaign. He had served in World War I as a submariner and had first-hand experience of what a submarine could become capable of. Donitz maintained very close relationships with his captains. He would meet his returning crews and pass down the ranks and shake hands with each man and bestow medals. Both Donitz and his superiors believed the key to victory was to stifle the Allies' supply line. Donitz pushed forcibly to build and use submarines to cripple the supply lines. However, his superiors saw more advantage with the traditional and proven battleship. Donitz's insistence of the advantages of submarines lasted throughout the war. Both Grand Admiral Erich Rieder and Donitz knew the war was 6 years too early for the German Navy. However, with the limitations of U-boat numbers, Donitz showed incredible success in the Atlantic and North Sea. The world was not prepared for submarine warfare. The merchant ships were unescorted and scattered. They were easy targets. They were so easy that the U-boats would surface and give the ship's crew time to abandon ship before sinking the vessel with their forward-mounted guns. Throughout the early stages of the war, the U-boats continued unchallenged in their objective to block the shipping lanes. The only advantage at this time for the merchant seamen was speed. The U-boats could only intercept them. If sighted, the merchant vessel could easily outrun them. The first initiative to curb the high casualty count was the development of moving ships in convoys, which were escorted by destroyers and other fighting ships. Many merchant ships were also fitted with 4-inch or similar guns. However, anti-submarine warfare was still in its infancy, and losses remained high. In fact, Donitz created a new way to deal with convoys. He developed the wolf pack. When a convoy was sighted, the U-boat captain radioed its position, direction and speed to HQ, where Donitz and his staff plotted courses for other U-boats to also intercept. The U-boats would shadow the convoy by day and attack under the cover of night. The U-boats were slow when submerged. However, on the surface, they could reach 16 knots. The merchantman's only way of detecting a U-boat was visually, and at night, the low profile of the U-boat was difficult to see, which allowed the U-boat to close in on its target before diving. The wolf packs were extremely successful, and some U-boat captains were even able to slip into the convoy formation and attack within. This caused even greater confusion to the merchant vessels and their escorts. The losses of merchant ships continued into late 41. These losses could not continue for much longer, otherwise the war was lost. The English had to counter the U-boat threat. Within the U-boat fraternity, this period was known as the Happy Days. However, the tide was about to turn. Donitz's Wolfpack system heavily relied on radio communication, and this was the system's flaw. Radio directional fighting equipment was developed. The British were able to hone in on the direction of the Germans' radio signal, which lifted the U-boat's veil of stealth. But a bigger development was radar. The escort ships could now detect surface U-boats at much greater distances. Great advances in aviation also played a role in the U-boat's demise. The aerial coverage of shipping lanes was vastly increased, and spotter planes were also equipped with radar. Any surfaced U-boat at this time was in jeopardy. To add to the peril of the U-boat crews, the Americans joined the war and supplied Allied forces with even more radar-equipped aircraft to further broaden and intensify the search for surfaced U-boats. At the end of the war, the tally was 288 U-boat losses to air attack. An even more deadly tool was devised, the early sonar. An underwater sound pulse was sent out, and like radar, the return signal revealed the presence of the U-boat. Now they could be detected on the surface and hunted down while they were submerged. These developments were the birth of today's anti-submarine warfare. The total number of U-boats sunk or captured is approximately 780. Towards the end of the war, a U-boat was not expected to complete more than 2 missions before being destroyed. After Hitler's death, Grand Admiral Donitz was appointed head of state, and on May the 4th, he gave the order for U-boats to cease hostility. In a final address to his beloved U-boat crews, he stated, "My U-boat men, 6 years of warfare lay behind us. You have fought like lions. A crushing superiority has compressed into a very narrow area. The continuation of the struggle from the bases which remain. Unbroken in your warlike courage, you are laying down your arms after an heroic fight which knows no equal. In reverence memory, we think of our comrades who have died. Comrades, maintain your U-boat spirit in which you fought most bravely and unflinchingly during the long years." It was a fitting tribute to a brave and dedicated service of the 39,000 men who served in U-boats. 5,000 had been captured and near 28,000 killed in action. If Donitz had the quantity of U-boats at the outset of the war, it is very possible that Germany may have been able to cripple Britain by denying it much needed food, oil and military hardware supplies. Churchill confirms this when he stated, "They were the only thing that really frightened me." This is HMS Unseen of the RANS Upholder class of hunter-killer diesel-electric submarines. This class is an example of the early teardrop-shaped hulls. At this time, more computer and technically advanced weapon systems were being installed in submarines. These were a radical change from the early World War II vintage design. Perhaps of most interest is the class of submarine, which depicts the pinnacle of World War II's submarine development. The Oberon class is exactly this pinnacle. These submarines were very quiet for their day and stayed in service with various navies past the year 2000. At the time, they were state-of-the-art conventional subs, despite being based on a late World War II German hull design. The last of the O-boats in RN service were paid off during the 1990s. Australia purchased 6 Oberon-class boats from the United Kingdom and commissioned them Oxley, Otway, Ovens, Onslow, Orion and Otama. They served the RAN and Australia for 3 decades.
Open the main event.
Open main vents. Full dive on the plane.
Over the years, many of the vessels were heavily modified in the weapon systems area further upgrades included the ability to fire Mark 48 torpedoes, which could carry a nuclear ordnance.
75 feet back to 52. 75 back to 52, Roger, sir. Officer Roger, you have Q.
Located at the Western Australian Maritime Museum is Oberon HMAS Ovens. What is interesting is that the Ovens' final resting place is an actual World War II submarine slipway. This Australian city of Fremantle was the largest Allied submarine base outside of the United States. Ovens would be considered a medium-sized submarine. It is interesting to note that HMAS Ovens was only the second conventional submarine to fire a subsurface launched harpoon missile. Consequently, the boat's designation changed from SS to SSG. Entrance to the submarine is via a 30-foot high stairway, and the view over the area can only make the visitor ponder the landscape during the heady days of the Fremantle base during operations in World War II. Visitors enter through the forward hatch and descend the original ladder into the forward torpedo room. Guides take the people on a journey of a lifestyle that can only be described as very alien to most of us.
The empty ones. If there's no empty ones, they sleep on the floor.
Everywhere, bunks are found. What is equally interesting is the amount of work required to get the submarine and maintain it in such a pristine condition. The Western Australian Maritime Museum preserved the submarine in conditions that reflect the submarine's original specifications, and they continue to hunt for even the smallest part to make the submarine as authentic as possible. This is two of Ovens' sister boats, Otama on the left and Orion on the right. Otama is bound for her last seagoing adventure. However, she will not sail this trip under her own power. Max Bryant, seen here, was in charge of overseeing the tow. Preparations included removing all hazardous waste from the vessel. All tanks, including fuel and ballast, had to be washed out and inspected. The Australian Navy offered their assistance to weld blanks on all the inlet and outlet openings in the hull. The submarine was then fitted with rigging required for its final 3,000-mile ocean journey. The tow took 13 days to complete, and adverse sea conditions had to be battled through the notorious waters of the Great Australian Bight and Bass Strait. Under maritime law, the Otama had to be towed unmanned. This meant that Otama was a dead ship without being able to assist in steerage, which added to this tense situation. Finally, the vessel arrived at Western Port Victoria, its final home. On a late summer's day in December, Otama slipped into the calm bay and was met by a crowd of curious onlookers and the organisers of the project. She remained hitched to the salvage vessel overnight, and early the next morning, with favourable tides, Otama was brought up the bay and moored at the town of Hastings.
Steering all right, Bob? Good, good. A gentle swing to port, please, Bob.
Once moored, work will begin to prepare Otama to be lifted from the sea and placed on land. In her new role, she will, like many other museum vessels around the world, serve to enlighten all who visit of the technical advancements of sea power and, most importantly, the bravery of the people who sailed such vessels past and present. Otama now has a new home, mission and crew. Surprisingly, some of her new crew are very familiar with the vessel. As a young man, David Hall was a cook on Otama, and on her arrival was keen to explore the vessel and seek out his old and familiar bunk. In this tiny kitchen, he prepared over 180 meals per day. His shift was 15 hours, 7 days a week. Otama closely resembles a World War II type vessel, and conditions on board reflect this. 2 toilet showers for 60 men. In the makeshift lighting of Otama, the cramped living is further accentuated. Every aspect of a submarine has procedure, even the way garbage is ejected from a specialised unit. The Oberons were possibly the most effective conventional submarine class of its time, with an astonishing reputation for quietness, which allowed it to exist in the 21st century. In fact, the ability of the O-boats to run in total silence enabled Australian submarines to successfully attack USS Enterprise, despite a huge number of supporting ships protecting it. The modern submariner and the modern submarine were born from the hearts and the metal of men and machines that have gone before. This is Sea Power.